Don't just leave us behind like that as if we did not, simply exist. Because we've been there. We've been there to serve people food, to cook for them, to clean the table, to clean everything with the smile, and to cheer everybody up. Just don't forget us.
I'm Dani Valent, and this is Dirty Linen, the podcast that takes the issues the hospitality industry finds hard to air in public and shakes them all about. We're continuing our week talking to and about visa holders in hospitality on Dirty Linen, and I'm really pleased to present to you Clement Demarais. He's from France, and I met him through the Attica Soup project. Maybe a couple of months ago, Clement, you sent me your CV, and it's about 6 pages long, and it really tells it tells, I guess, part of your story. Like, you were born and raised in the south of France, a very foodie family. From a very young age, you were immersed in the world of hospitality, but you're so incredibly qualified. You've got a hospitality MBA from business school in Paris. You've run restaurants and businesses in Australia. I feel like you're so highly accomplished, and it's just really crazy that you are in the situation that you're in now. But first of all, welcome, bienvenue to my podcast. Thanks for chatting to me.
Merci, Dani. Thank you so much. And what an accent. Like, when you said my name, it was wonderful.
Thank you. That will be the last piece of French that I speak today. But I do love bashing away at French. And let's hope that one day I'm in Paris and can mangle the language again, as I so love to do. In fact, around this time, I was planning a trip to Europe, and I was going to go not to Paris, but to the south of France to a friend has a share in a house in Provence, and I was going to be there to celebrate my birthday. However, many plans have changed this year, haven't they?
I know the feeling. I was supposed actually to be in France right now with my family in Provence. That's where I'm coming from. So next time you decide to go in Provence, just let me know. I can probably help you, organize that, or give you some names of places you can go to as well.
Great. Well, that is an absolute deal. I'm definitely going to hit you up, and I certainly look forward to the time that I can plan overseas trips, because much as I love Melbourne, it's also, it's a great place to come home to, and I love being here, but I don't want to be stuck here like I am now.
I know the feeling.
But anyway, let's talk about you. Tell me a little bit about yourself, about your time in Australia and the circumstances that you find yourself in at the moment.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I first came in Australia in 2009, and I never wanted basically to spend more than a year. My aim was to come here, spend a year, and then go back to Europe, where I would do my MBA ultimately. But I loved it so much that I went from working holiday visa. I extended it with, at the time we had the woofing program. So it's the willing worker on organic farms. And so you could work 3 months on the farm and help a farmer, like learning how to do some fencing, and then, like the Australian dreams, I guess. And then, I extended it thanks to that. And then I had a second year, and I met some, couple that wanted to open a restaurant. So became fairly quickly general manager and shareholder in a business that I had for about 4 years, before eventually going back to France, do my MBA in Paris, and then come back in Australia. This time in Sydney. I had a startup in food concept, and then worked in restaurant at the same time. So I was F&B manager, store manager as well. And then I was sent recently to Melbourne to open the latest store of the restaurant chain I was working for at the time of it was before the coronavirus happened.
Okay. And what happened when the pandemic snuck up on us?
It was very weird, because we we went from like in December, January, everything is perfect, it's going well. My staff was very happy. They told me I was the best manager in the universe. Anyway, and we were
Oh,
like,
wow.
I know. And then we were like, everybody was like happy and just like it was normal, normal kind of activity to uh, February. So I used to manage a store in the Glen Waverley, east of Melbourne, and we had one of the first cases of coronavirus, I think in Victoria, in a store, in a restaurant, about 500 meters away from us. So from there onwards, it was like, it was, terrible days after days because nobody knew what was going on, if it was just a flu, if it was like something bigger than that. And we certainly did not know it was a pandemic situation.
So Glen Waverley got pretty quiet pretty quick, didn't it? Like people just stopped going out.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody was extremely cautious, which is great at the end of the day. But you can understand that all of a sudden, like from moving from like a busy activity in terms of restaurant to not having anyone in the store, all of a sudden you don't really know how to react because you've never been trained to this kind of, event.
Yeah, none of us have any experience. We don't know how to deal with this one.
Exactly. So it was like cutting hours, stop ordering produce to suppliers, and then all of a sudden we learned that we had to go into lockdown, and that's where it became interesting, I guess, for international workers like me, because all of a sudden we were sort of like left a little bit aside, with not so many options. I mean, the only options we were given was to go home, but for people in my case, we've been living here for years now. And flying back home was like a bit weird because I feel like I'm home. I've been part of that community for years now, actively paying taxes or just friends, girlfriend, my Australian family, kind of to, hey, how about you just leave the country?
Yeah, it's a very large misunderstanding of the life that you've built for yourself here and also how much you've invested to be here. Not only have you invested, but your employer invested to sponsor you, and it's an expensive process for everybody on both sides of the equation. I mean, can you just explain to people listening who might not know of the investment that you put into being in Australia? Just how much do you think you would have spent over the years in fees on visas and all the skills tests and all the kinds of things that you need to go through?
Well, basically, I mean, you can understand that the government is asking you to tick, a certain number of boxes, such as, for example, my diploma were in French, and so on and so forth. So you need to translate that in English, which is fine. And then maybe the system are a bit different, so you need just to make sure that the government can understand that. So you need a translator that is accredited by the government to do that. And then, so you go through that process. The fees, I don't remember exactly, but it's, a couple of $100 every time you get a new document to translate, I think. And then after, for the fees for the visa, it depends a bit on the company you are going to work with. So if the employer is sort of like, willing to support you because he sees you or she sees you as an asset, then they will sort of like take over those fees. But most of the time, what's happened is you pay for your fair share. So I want to say probably $20,000 to $30,000 altogether.
$20,000 to $30,000 to be here, but to not have any, not be treated like an Australian citizen when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, well, you can understand. I mean, I can understand the fees that are linked with the fact that, okay, I'm here, and then you understand that I've got those skills, and then you employ me under those circumstances, so that's fine. To me, what I don't understand is I pay those taxes to be part of this community that I evolve into, and I've sort of like tick the boxes, like the government asks me to do things, and I'm like, okay, I do it, no problem. And I show all the paperwork and so on and so forth. But after all of that, they're like, oh yeah, but we don't need you anymore, or how about you go somewhere else? We don't want to have. You feel a bit like you're a burden all of a sudden, and that's not the best way to see yourself. The situation to see yourself into.
Yeah, well, I mean, for you, you're so highly skilled. You've gone from, enterprise to enterprise. You've helped people build their businesses, and you've built your own business. What was it like for you to be out of work and to be in a position where, much as I am always delighted to see you and give you soup, but to be in a position where you're coming somewhere for somebody to give you food?
The first 3 days of the lockdown, I was extremely happy because for the first time, I was able to see a couple of movies I wanted to watch, and I never had a chance to see them. So I was like, yes, so in 3 days, I sort of like watch movies, Netflix and so on and so forth. But the thing is, after 3 days, I was like, okay, so what am I supposed to do now? And that was like fairly hard. So I'm not used to do nothing. And I think the worst part was not doing nothing. It was almost considering yourself as not being helpful. Because just to give you an idea, when, at the very beginning of the lockdown, when we heard all the stories about, the toilet papers and then, everything that was missing in the supermarket, I was thinking I'm happy to go there. And then, if they need a hand, I go, I work. I don't need to have like the best salary in the world, but just give a hand, because that's the community I'm supporting. I want to work, I want to give a hand, but I can't because my visa have restrictions. So it's like, I'm not useful and my restrictions are making me, I sort of like have to stay in a corner basically, and then wait until maybe something good happens. So it's been hard, like psychologically. I mean, I've been extremely lucky to have people around myself. But there've been time where it was very hard to just get outside, and be like, okay, so what am I doing? What am I supposed to do tomorrow? Etc., etc. So many questions. And yeah.
So just for anyone who's doesn't know the system, so if people are here as a sponsored worker on a visa 457 or 482, they're basically tied to the business that employs them. So if that business is not able to continue to employ them, that person's not able to go and work for somebody else. So Clement and people in his position couldn't get a job in a supermarket, they couldn't sanitize tram stops, they couldn't go and pick fruit. They're basically held hostage to this original employer. For another business to take them on, they also have to take on the sponsorship. So that's an investment of around $10,000. So it's a really tricky one, because as much as somebody might want your skills, Clement, they simply might not be able to afford to invest in you at the moment. So it's really tricky. Tell me what your views are on the sponsorship system, and do you think it works? Apart from during a pandemic, what are your views on how the sponsorship system works?
It's a very hard question because there is many benefits and there is many flaws as well. I think it's great that, like, for example, let's say like a business owner somewhere in Australia cannot find the skills, like in a pool of people that is given, can sort of like pick someone from the outside, and get them to work for them and then evolve and so on and so forth. It's I think it's a sensitive topic, because not everybody can be given that responsibility. I believe that like a business owner is like a bit of an ambassador of Australia in a way, and when they are like sort of like taking someone from the outside, they are responsible for the whole journey. And it's fairly common to hear discussion with international workers that have been sort of like taken advantage of. I'm not saying it's everyone. I'm just saying like this case, this situation exists, and yeah, it's a bit of it's a complex situation.
It's a tricky one because the employer has to prove, they have to advertise the job locally. They have to show that the only person that they can employ that's qualified to do this particular job is overseas. And then they can bring someone over. But as we now understand, you're very much beholden to that employer. And if they don't continue to employ you, then you may not be able to stay here. So it does put people who've come here in somewhat of a precarious position where they are really reliant on that employer. So do you think that there should be some further oversight by the government or some way that this system makes sure that it protects the interests of both the employer and the employee in this scenario?
That's correct. I completely agree with what you're saying, because I think both the employer and the employee are making some sort of like having an agreement. Like I'm happy to bring my skills on the market, but if there is, as you said, if it's too precarious, then why should I do that? Then I think there are some sponsors that are sort of like taking a bit advantage of the situation. And I think the government should probably do something to sort of like overview and monitor a bit more what is going on, the evolution, and, if everything is sort of like respected. Because it's in everybody's own benefit, from the employee to the employer and the government ultimately as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard that sometimes happens is that the employer asks the overseas worker to pay the employer's expenses. So it's illegal to do this, but I have heard that it can happen where they would ask the employee to pay back the visa fee expenses, the immigration lawyer expenses. There's a skills levy that employers have to pay, and some employees come from overseas that perhaps they don't understand all the rules, or perhaps they're so desperate to be here that they will assist the employer to do something that's actually against the law and pay for those expenses.
That's true. I think at the end of the day, there's something important that needs to be said. It's not every migrant is desperate to be here. Like it's great. I think I'm talking on behalf of everyone today, thanks to the podcast, but I'm thinking that, we're happy to bring our skills and then make our life as well here in Australia. Like as I said, like pay our tax, evolve, get married or whatever, whatever things would suit you, have kids and then, buy a house, car, and then, and so on and so forth. So that's fairly simple down the line. So I've heard stories about migrants working with like a sponsor and having to face like certain precarious situation where, for example, they had to work overtime. Otherwise, they would not be considered, and they could be sort of like sent back to their country, between comma. So yeah, that's I've heard like a bit of a couple of abuse here and there, but yeah, it's as I said, there is the good and the bad side of it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be whatever the system is and whatever the country is. There's going to be people trying to rort it or to get around it, and of course, there's also going to be a lot of people that are doing the right thing from all sides. One of the things that people have said to me, when I've been speaking up about the issue of visa holders, is that we just should be giving these jobs to Australians. There's so many unemployed Australians. Why would we want anybody to be here from overseas to do these jobs? What do you think that you and people like you can bring to the Australian hospitality industry that isn't here already?
So I think the type of visa has a name, and it's called skilled worker, and that's pretty much what is lacking currently on the market in Australia. And that's the reason why we are here. Is because we bring as well those skills. I think it's a fair market in Australia. If you want a job, you just apply for it, and then if the employer is happy with that, then it's going to give you the job. I think we are sort of like bringing on the top of the multiculturalism. You've got people from all around the world working in hospitality industry in Australia, and that's what makes it so interesting. Melbourne, Sydney, you've got so many restaurants from different background. It's so exciting. But it's sort of like as well push a bit, there's a bit of dynamism, a bit of competition, and then it sort of like brings everybody, it pushes everybody up, in terms of level. It levels up everyone by bringing some other people into this type of industry ultimately.
So why don't you think the skills base in Australia is very strong? Do you think it's a cultural thing that you don't see many Australians wanting to go into hospitality, or do you think it's the way that the training system works? Like, why is it that there aren't enough skills among Australians?
Well, something I've heard over the past 10 years in Australia is that hospitality is not a proper, work in hospitality is not a proper work. I've heard so many people saying like, okay, you might do your studies, and then in the meantime, you might have a job in a restaurant, or something like that. But ultimately, it's to get like a job somewhere else in another industry. So I don't think it's been extremely valued in the past as it has been in other countries, such as, for example, I'm taking obviously the example of France, where, tourism, food, it's part of our culture and our identity as well. And there's no shame in working in such industry. So I'm thinking there's a bit of a different perspective on the industry. And the second aspect is it remains like a bit of a tough industry as well, because the hours are fairly hard. Certain conditions are, not very making it easier, I guess. And you need to be on the top, because the competition in Australia is fierce. You've got a lot of restaurants. If you're not happy, you just put like a bad review online. It's very easy to complain. And then, so yeah, I think that's probably, like the two main points I've got in mind when I think about the hospitality industry, and the fact that maybe Australians don't really want to go into that industry. And it's probably better for, I guess, immigrants.
So in all the places that you've worked in Australia, have people on temporary visas always been an essential part of the business?
Mostly, yeah. And you've got some great stories, because that's what you want to see as well. You want to see people joining a business and maybe starting as a dishy and then evolving as a kitchen hand, and then second, a sous chef kind of position, and then potentially a chef eventually after a couple of years. So you've got some great stories like that, and that we all want to see more and more. And of course, skilled visa workers are essential for the hospitality industry in Australia, I guess.
So when you've spoken to your family and friends back in France during the coronavirus period, what have they said about your plight in Australia and about what the analogous situation in France?
They did not really understand what was going on, because the situation over there was fairly simple. As soon as you were working for a company, whether you were French or from European or from overseas, the government would support you because you are part of the society, you are part of the community. So 80% of the salary was taken care of by the government and the rest by the company during that time. So as soon as I mentioned that to my family, they could not believe it because basically the only option I was given was, hey, how about you access $10,000 of your superannuation? And that was it. So from my understanding, my superannuation is something I will benefit, when I'm gonna retire. But no, it's something it was the only option that was given to me. Um, and nobody could really understand that. So we were like sort of like all puzzled. And I'm still puzzled. I mean, I made the choice to remain in Australia during, in the meantime. And sometimes I just can't believe it. So yeah.
It is pretty unbelievable. And I think, so everybody in Australia who'd lost a certain amount of income was able to access up to $10,000 of their superannuation in the last financial year. People on temporary visas were not given the option to access it this financial year, whereas Australians were. I think for anybody, accessing your super is really a last resort. That's the money that's there for your future. But to make that the only option for temporary visa holders, I think was incredibly insulting, as though to say that your future is not as important as anybody else's. Is that how you saw it?
This is correct. It's like, like all of a sudden your self valuation like takes a hit. You are like, oh, okay. So I'm not that important to you. And yeah, so it doesn't help you in feeling good at all. And definitely you don't feel like you're essential, which is another hit. So I feel like, you're lucky when you've got, some good people around you to support you. Like just to give you a couple of ideas, I had like some my previous customers. They invited me for a meal, and they could not believe the situation I was into. I had my staff, the staff I used to manage. They had access to the support from the government. They sent me some, like some little package with, a bit of food in it, just a bit of love, and that was fantastic. They've been like people like you, Dani, that did organize like, with the soup project that gave us a bit of hope, and our family and so on and so forth. But that was pretty much it. So yeah, it's been rough. It's been rough.
Yeah, for me, the fact that you're here because Australia decided that we needed your skills, and then to just like turn our backs on you, it's as you say, it's puzzling. Beyond puzzling, it's very upsetting. And I think just from a simple social justice point of view, it's wrong. And we should definitely be doing better by people such as yourself, Clement. If I suddenly transformed into the Prime Minister of Australia, what would you like to say to me? I just got a little shudder as I said those words because I don't want to transform into the Prime Minister of Australia. But anyway, what would you say to me?
I think about the future as well, like I think we are all in this together. And we did participate in the fact that Australia is where it is, right now, without, like by respecting the rules, by respecting the regulation and every single requirement that was asked to us, don't just leave us behind like that as if we did not, simply exist. Because we've been there to, to serve people food, to cook for them, to clean the table, to clean everything, with the smile, and to cheer everybody up, with following like the simple path of any migrant that came in Australia. So just don't forget us. Yeah, I think that would be pretty much what I would tell you.
Yeah. All right. Well, as Prime Minister of Australia, I'm changing the rules as of tomorrow morning, Clement. So I'm glad I now have this power. Clement, I wish I had that power, and I'll keep speaking up as much as I can on your behalf and for people like you. And honestly, if there's one good thing about the coronavirus, it's the fantastic people that I've had the privilege to meet, and I certainly count you among those. So thank you so much for coming on to Dirty Linen, sharing your story, and speaking so eloquently about the path and the plight of a temporary visa holder in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.